Two people start training arms on the same Monday morning. Same gym, same time available, same number of sets per week. One of them designs every session around feeling the pump. High reps, controlled burn, constant tension, the kind of session where the arms are flushed and swollen by the end. It feels productive. It feels like growth is happening. The other one does not chase the pump. They choose specific exercises based on what position maximally stretches the target muscle under load. They progress the weight every time they can complete all their reps, and they stop a session when the quality of the mechanical stimulus declines, not when the burn has been sustained long enough. 30 days later, one of them has measurably bigger arms. Understanding why requires understanding the one thing that actually sends the signal that makes arm muscle grow, and why the training most people do in the gym is optimized for the feeling of growth rather than the mechanism. Think of your arm muscles as a building under active construction. The growth signal is the building permit. Without the permit, workers can arrive every day, materials can be delivered, scaffolding can go up, but nothing structural gets built. The permit is the authorization for the actual construction. In muscle tissue, that permit is mechanical tension. Specifically, mechanical tension applied at the point in the range of motion where the muscle is at or near its lengthened state. This is not a subtle detail. It is the primary mechanism by which resistance training produces structural muscle growth, and it is the mechanism that most common arm training approaches do not consistently apply. A comprehensive review published in the Journal of Sport and Health Science in 2025 by Van Every, Phillips and colleagues established the current scientific consensus directly. Mechanical tension is the primary and essential driver of resistance training-induced muscle hypertrophy through mechanotransductive signaling, independent of systemic hormonal fluctuations. The same review stated two things that most arm training programs are built on the opposite assumption of. First, acute increases in testosterone, growth hormone, or IGF-1 after exercise do not influence muscle protein synthesis or hypertrophic outcomes in men or women. The hormonal spike you get from an intense training session is not the growth signal. The mechanical signal inside the muscle is. Second, metabolite accumulation and cell swelling, the pump, lack causal evidence for promoting hypertrophy. Their effects are indirect and mechanistically minimal. The burn, the pump, the hormonal spike, these are not the permit. They are the feeling of construction activity without the authorization to build. Here is what the 30 days actually look like when the right signal is applied consistently. Week 1, days 1 through 7. The first week is not about visible change. It is about beginning to apply the correct signal consistently enough for the cellular machinery to register it. In practical terms, this means two structural adjustments that most arm training programs do not make. For the triceps, the majority of common tricep exercises, skull crushers, pushdowns, kickbacks, train the muscle in a shortened or neutral arm position. These exercises apply tension primarily through the mid and short range of the muscle's length. Research published in the European Journal of Sports Science in 2023 compared tricep hypertrophy after 12 weeks of cable elbow extensions performed either in the overhead position or in the neutral position. Same load, same reps, same sets. The overhead position, which stretches the long head of the triceps at the shoulder, produced substantially greater hypertrophy than the neutral position, even when the overhead group was using lower absolute loads because of the position. The overhead cable extension, the overhead dumbbell tricep extension, the incline skull crusher, these exercises work not because of how heavy they are, but because of where in the length tension curve the tension is being applied. For the biceps, the preacher curl positions the bicep in a stretched state at the bottom of the movement. A study published in the European Journal of Human Movement in 2024 measured biceps brachii cross-sectional area after 6 weeks of preacher curl training. The distal region of the biceps, the region that most standing curl variations under train, showed a thickness increase of 25.95% with a large effect size. 6 weeks. Preacher curls 3 times per week. Week 1 is about building these exercises into the structure and beginning to track the loads used in each session. Weeks 2 through 3, days 8 through 21. This is the window where the cellular machinery begins responding structurally to the repeated signal. After the first session of sufficient mechanical tension at the lengthened position, mechanosensors in the muscle fiber membrane, specifically integrins and focal adhesion complexes, detect the deformation of the cytoskeleton under load. This activates a signaling cascade that ultimately reaches mTOR complex 1, the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. Ribosomes increase. Satellite cells begin activating. None of this is visible in week 1. The structural changes in the muscle tissue take time to accumulate above the threshold of measurement, but the signal is running from the first session, and its consistency across weeks 2 and 3 is what determines whether the accumulation begins to manifest. Progressive overload is the mechanism that keeps the signal growing. Research by Nobrega and colleagues published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in 2023 confirmed that muscle hypertrophy is affected by volume load progression models, specifically that groups using progressive overload showed substantially more growth than groups training with the same load throughout. The permit must authorize a progressively larger building to actually produce a larger building. In practical terms, increase the weight when you complete all your reps cleanly, not by a large amount, by the smallest increment available, 1 kilogram on dumbbells, 2.5 kilograms on cables. The consistency of small progressive increments over weeks 2 and 3 compounds into a training stimulus that cannot be produced by staying at the same weight. Weeks 3 and 4, days 22 through 30. By week 3, most people who have applied this correctly will begin noticing the first measurable structural changes. Not dramatic. The Physiological Review's meta-analysis of resistance training studies found that 8 to 16 weeks of consistent training produces 5 to 20% increases in skeletal muscle volume. 30 days is the early end of that range. The changes beginning at day 22 to 30 are the early accumulation of what will be more visible at week 8. What matters at this point is that the cellular machinery is running. The mTOR signaling is being activated consistently. Satellite cells have been recruited. New myonuclei are being incorporated. The infrastructure for larger muscle fibers is being built. The person in the original comparison who was chasing the pump is also experiencing cellular activity, but the signal driving that activity is metabolic stress, a secondary and indirect stimulus, rather than the primary mechanotransductive signal at the lengthened position. The building permit is partial. The construction is slower. At day 30, the difference between the two approaches is beginning to be measurable in cross-sectional area if imaging were used. Visible in the gym mirror, it depends on starting point, body fat, and genetics. Measurable in load used per session, the progressive overload approach is almost always ahead. Before the protocol, arm training at the lengthened position, particularly overhead tricep work, places specific demand on the shoulder joint and elbow. If you have existing shoulder or elbow pain, speak with a physiotherapist or sports medicine doctor before training in these positions. Start with loads you can control through the full range before increasing weight. The protocol for 30 days is 3 inputs. 1. Replace at least 1 tricep exercise per session with an overhead variation, overhead cable extension or overhead dumbbell extension. Train in the full range of motion with the arm fully extended overhead at the bottom of the movement. 2. Include preacher curls as a primary bicep exercise. Cable preacher curls allow consistent tension at the bottom stretch position better than barbell preacher curls for most people. 3. Track every load used in every session and increase by the smallest available increment whenever you complete all sets cleanly. That is the blueprint. The workers arrive at every session. The permit is the mechanical tension at the lengthened position. The progressive overload is the authorization for a progressively larger building. If this changed how you approach arm training, subscribe and leave a like. Tell me in the comments, were you training triceps in the overhead position or defaulting to pushdowns, and are you going to test the difference?